The only time in my 10 years of prison where I truly believed, okay, this is it. I'm going to die. This is without a doubt probably one of my darkest stories. For me personally, it's one I don't even share much with my friends, family, girlfriend. I struggle with if I'll be able to accurately portray this story descriptively on this video. But if I could momentarily transfer just that overall feeling of dread, this looming sense of danger, violence that was just following me like a cloud during this time that the story took place, I would just to help with this story, but I can't. But nevertheless, here's my best attempt. So buckle up, folks. This one's quite a doozy, and it's probably going to be a long one. So this takes place at the Tiger River Correctional Institution in South Carolina. I believe it was 2018. And a few things you need to understand about this prison is, number one, how these dorms were set up. We call them dorms, but you had cell blocks within them. Now each dorm, let's say we're talking dorm number 1. And you go in there and maybe you have a booth that the officer sits in. It's called a sally port. And you walk in and let's say this room is the booth and I'm the officer. But these walls would all be made of glass. Now on this side of the wall, there would be a cell block. And on this side of the wall, there would be a cell block. But it would all be glass and I could see both sides from my booth. So that would be building 1, dorm 1, A side and B side. And if I'm being honest, during the 3 years that I stayed on this yard out of my full 10 in prison, this was probably one of the more privileged yards. It's a little less dangerous than some of the others I've been to. That's fair to say. But as you're about to find out, if the right person, just one person, comes along onto that yard, it can easily become one of the most dangerous. And that's what happened. So yes, at this time I was in a prison gang. It's called 7-4 or the G's. There were also just as many Crips and just as many Bloods. There was about an equal number of all 3 gangs in that whole building, A side and B side, at that time. And we all got along. It was kind of that atmosphere in the cell block and the dorm that nobody had any problems. We had all kind of been there. Everyone who was anyone had been there for quite a while, and there were no issues. There was no tension, and we all got along. You could even say figuratively there was the sun shining down on us. That's how it felt. When there's no tension and there's no war, there's no gang violence, there's nobody getting stabbed, there's no real beef. This is kind of like a sun out moment. The sunshine was out every day and it was pretty nice. And then this dark, big rain cloud just kind of moved over our dorm. And this rain cloud would be the arrival of a high-rank chief 5-star Blood gang member who we'll call Tony T. Tony T was a very young guy to have the kind of rank that he had. He was maybe all of 24 years old, but he was a very serious young man. Now, I assume because of the amount of time he was sentenced to at a very young age, I believe 17, it caused him to just turn up, you could say, to an extreme degree, to where he was able to keep up with these, for reference, when you have a Blood gang member of this rank in prison, it's usually a much older, experienced, seasoned guy, whereas Tony T was a youngster. But he was able to match them with his violence and just some of the work that he had put in physically, violently on these level 3s, which a level 3 in South Carolina is maximum security. Level 2, which is Tiger River, the prison this story takes place at, is level 2. And then you have your level 1, which is minimum security. Tony T was a young guy in a very deadly place, the deadliest of all the places in South Carolina, and he was hanging with the veterans. Okay, and so he had amassed a very respectable amount of rank and influence and say-so over the entire Blood gang in this state. I'm not sure why or how, But Tony T had been transferred from this maximum security level 3 down to the medium security level 2, which was Tiger River, which is where I was at. And what he found was things were very different here than what he was used to. And he was going to use that to his advantage. Where he was from, when gang members took a shower, there was at least one, usually two, other gang members standing guard outside of their shower with their boots fully laced and a knife in their hands in case anyone tried to ambush that person in the shower. He noticed right away no gang, or anyone for that matter, was doing this. The example I just gave you really set the precedent for everything he saw, everywhere he looked, what he expected to see, the way that inmates conduct themselves, especially the gang members. Nothing was being enforced. Nothing that he was used to on these more dangerous prison yards was happening here. And a lot of those things were security measures for the gangs, which made him realize there's a lot of holes and a lot of weaknesses in these gangs, and I think it's time to exploit them. When it came to gangs, rival gangs, Tony T really believed in the idea of divide and conquer. He didn't want to approach a whole gang in itself. He wanted to get one of those gang members by themselves and see what they would do and how they would act when they were alone. And what he found out was what they would do is nothing more than get stepped on by the force who was Tony T. He started with the Crips. Now on my side, B side of this building 1, there was about 4, maybe 5 Crips in total. Now Tony T was not on my side, he was on the opposite side. Remember I explained there's A and B. Now A should not be able to cross over to B, but Tony did. How did he do it? Don't know. He just had this way, this air about him, this leadership, this confidence when he went to do something, and the officer would simply let him through. And I know you're thinking, wait, jumpsuit, wait, pause right there. I'm invested in the story. Give me a little, explain a little more. How did he really do it? I mean, why did the officers really let him go by? How could he get away with this stuff as far as with the staff? Well, brother, I would love to know those answers myself. Pretty much everyone on this side of the building noticed when Tony T entered the cell block with about 3 other Bloods behind him. Now he went downstairs to the cell of a Crip named Young Money. And he went into the cell of Young Money. It was just him and Young Money, and the other 3 Bloods would stand guard outside of the door to make sure no other Crips were able to come in. Once Tony T was inside this cell, he simply told Young Money, I know you have a cell phone. Give me your cell phone, or else you better be ready to die. At which point he pulled out a large knife. Young Money gave him the cell phone. Now don't ask me why, because I don't know, but I could take a guess. No other Crips ever retaliated or grouped up to get any retaliation against Tony T for this. Tony T saw this and probably suspected that would be the outcome all along. So at this point, he had a cell phone for himself. Next, he believed he wanted quantity over quality as far as numbers for his Blood gang on this yard. So he began recruiting all the youngsters to the Blood gang. He was much more relatable to these youngsters than most of the older guys who are usually the high-rank members who bring guys into gangs. And because he was younger, he was able to relate to them more, and they really looked up to Tony. They really admired what he did over there, how he just took a phone from a well-respected inmate and gang member of the Crips who was Young Money. Once these young guys got put into the Blood gang, Tony T made the promise that all of you guys will have your cell phones if you just do what I tell you. And so they did. He was able to militarize a whole small group of young inmates into doing virtually anything he said, and really grew a force. And he would continue this same routine of coming to our side, finding a Crip, isolating them, having Blood stand outside the door so that no one could interfere, while he, 1-to-1, told this Crip, give me your cell phone or get ready to die. And I guess you could just see it in his eyes that he wasn't making idle threats, and if you didn't give it up, you're gonna die or you'll have a hell of a fight on your hands. So one by one, they did what he said, and it came down to one final Crip member, who we'll call Hercules, simply because he was the biggest, almost bodybuilder-esque guy in the dorm. And if everyone hadn't gotten along so well before Tony T came, you could have said he would have been the dorm bully. But as he noticed day by day that Tony T was singling out and making his way through each member of the Crips, something crazy happened. Hercules told the prison staff that they need to get him out of there, and now. And so they did. And that really only added to this sense of danger that came along with Tony T and what he was capable of. Now, when Hercules got himself taken out of that cell block, he took his contraband phone with him, hoping to save it, which he did. Now, when Tony T found out about this, he was furious. He felt like he had missed out on just one more phone to add to the collection, and one more phone that had been promised to one of these youngsters that he had recruited. And so he wanted to find a replacement. And who better than a guy who, while unaffiliated with any gang, much less the Crips, in our cell block, was the actual legitimate cousin of Hercules and had a cell phone himself. For that reason, with that justification, he became the perfect target for Tony T. It only made sense to go for this guy, not because you've done anything to me, and not because you are a Crip, which, looking back, I believe he just had a personal vendetta with these Crips, which is why he started making his way through them and taking them out one by one, but because if I wanted to get my hands on your cousin Hercules and now I can't, I guess I'll just have to go to you. And so he did. And one day he came over to my side, just as always, with his force of young bloods behind him. And as he did, everyone in this dorm, even the people unaffiliated who didn't even have phones, they knew what was up. They knew it was going to happen next, and they couldn't help but kind of turn their heads. And it became a situation where all eyes were on Tony T and his gang. And Tony T noticed this, and he quickly put everyone in check. And he loudly shouted, announcing to the entire dorm, "What's everybody looking at? Do y'all want some smoke? Do y'all want some problems? No? Well, then mind your business." And they did. Now, after this, Tony T slowly made his way around the dorm until he found this cousin he was looking for. Myself, personally, I noticed this out of the window of my door while inside my cell on that cell block. And since it had nothing to do with me and it was none of my concern, I didn't go out there. I stayed in my cell and kept doing what I was doing. But I couldn't help but overhear this altercation once it began, when Tony T found this cousin of Hercules. And he pretty much gave him the same ultimatum that all the other Crips had been given. Give me your phone or be ready to die. Now, this cousin, even though he wasn't a gang member, he wasn't representing the Crips, even though he wasn't the biggest or the baddest, he wasn't necessarily ripped and intimidating. He was a man. And he was a man who didn't believe in being intimidated, pushed around, or bullied when he didn't deserve it. And I do have to give my respects and give credit to him for doing that. But unfortunately, with him doing this, this wasn't a movie, and he did not turn out to be the hero he may have thought he was going to be. It ended badly. I want to really take a moment to vividly describe how this sounded, this moment, how it sounded, and just the feeling and the emotions it gave me personally. I wasn't able to see it. My window of my door of my cell was covered, as often inmates do, so that other inmates can't really look inside and be nosy and see what you're doing. Everyone kind of puts a bed sheet or something over the window, and that's how mine was. So I wasn't able to see any of this. But with a building made out of concrete and metal, there's such an echo in there, and the dorm was so dead silent because of what was happening, except for these two guys. You couldn't help but hear. And what I did hear was just this movement in this circular motion all around the dorm as Tony T gave him chance after chance to take back his position of not wanting to cooperate. And his idea of giving him chances was slapping him across the face as he backed him down, and the cousin of Hercules backed up and continued being slapped and slapped and slapped. And after each slap, he would say, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Slap. "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Slap. Continued doing this all around the cell block, and I could hear this getting closer and getting closer to my door. And just my luck, somehow this routine of slapping him and making him back up as he walked him down around the cell block would end right in front of my cell door. They stopped right in front of it. I could see the shadows of their feet at the bottom crack of the door, where there's that little gap between the door and the floor. And it really brings to mind just the emotion, just the danger of it, and the visuals of it. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the movie Drag Me to Hell. It's a horror movie from a long time ago, but I'll play this scene to just really, it fits so perfectly with what I saw and just the fear that comes along with it because of what I heard. I mean, seriously, you know, I'm not going to be acting tough on here. I'll tell you right now, I would have been a lot more scared if I felt that in any way I would be involved in this. It had nothing to do with me, and I'll tell you right now, I was glad it didn't. But little did I know, soon after this, I would be in this same position that Hercules' cousin was in, maybe even worse. But for the moment, they stopped right there in front of my door, and I saw the shadow of their feet right there at my door. And I heard him say, "Your last chance, give me the phone." And the cousin wouldn't. And the next thing I heard was just the smack of blade hitting flesh. And I heard the thud of a body hitting against my cell door. And then I heard the slump of a body hitting the concrete floor. Now, after this happened, Tony T would find that this cousin didn't have that cell phone on his person, and he didn't know where it was. It wasn't in the cell. I think he had anticipated it, the cousin had, and he had that cell phone put up somewhere that only he knew where it was. He knew it was coming. Now, Tony T didn't really have time to just rip this whole cell block apart. He had just done something pretty bad and stabbed this guy in the face. And so he had to get back to his side and get away from the scene. So he did. But he knew that this wasn't over. And the next day, he was going to come back there in one way or another. No matter what he had to do, he would find that cell phone and he would get it. Now, during the time of this cousin getting stabbed and quickly afterwards getting taken out of that dorm and sent to the medical facility to treat his wounds, which of course he never said what happened. He didn't snitch. He didn't believe in that. And he was smart enough to know that it's probably best not to say anything. So he got stabbed, He took it like a man, and he kept his mouth shut. But during this time of him being taken out, which he had no time to get his cell phone or do anything with that cell phone, and the time that Tony T, the following day, would be able to come back and start figuring out where this cell phone was, a member of my gang who, like I said, we were all about evenly numbered at that time, so there was about 4 or 5, including myself, members of my gang, the 7-4s, aka the G's. One of these members we'll call Cruz. Now, Cruz, don't ask me how he didn't know that Tony T wanted the cell phone that belonged to the cousin of Hercules. Don't ask me how that missed him and how he just was totally unaware of that. But he was. This is real life. It's not a movie where everything perfectly makes sense. I guess he was asleep when all this happened. I don't know. He wasn't really paying close attention like he should be. And therefore, all he knew was that Hercules' cousin had been taken out of the cell block. All his possessions were still there. And somehow he knew where this guy liked to hide his cell phone. And so he went, since it was in his mind fair game, and took the cell phone that Tony T was going to be coming back for. Now, it didn't take Tony T long the next day to figure out that someone did know where that phone was kept and had taken it and now had that phone and was not being vocal about the fact that they had it. Now, don't ask me how he figured this out or if someone told him or how he came to that conclusion, because, again, I don't know. I'm not in his gang. I'm not a trusted blood. I wouldn't have that information. But he did. He's a convict. He has ways of figuring it out. Don't know. The point is, he knows that somebody had it, but he didn't know who. And because I guess he felt that he couldn't really trust the word, or he just didn't even want to conversate with these Crips that he had already pretty much just stepped on, in a sense, he went to the other gang that was in the cell block, which was the G's. And who he chose to go to was the very man who had taken the phone. But he didn't know he had taken the phone. So again, with his preferred method of divide and conquer, he pulled Cruz off to the side by himself, one-on-one. He asked him, "Who's got that phone?" And Cruz was so scared and in fear of what would happen if he told him that he had the phone, that Cruz decided to lie. See, Cruz knew that the phone he had was an exact replica of the phone that I had. This isn't an uncommon thing, because when phones get thrown over the fence into prisons, it's by a guy who was told to go, a guy who's on the outside that someone on the inside knows, and they tell them, go to Dollar General, Walmart, whatever, get 10 of these phones, real cheap ones for $30 a pop, wrap them all up in duct tape and throw them over. So it's not uncommon at all for everyone to kind of have the same model of phone. And that was the case with me and Cruz. We had the same model of phone. And because he didn't want it to come out that he was the guy who took the phone, and he wanted to keep his phone without having any issues with Tony T, which he knew Tony T would take that if he found out, and he didn't want him to take it. He wanted to keep it. Naturally, like any inmate would, he decided he would say, "I had it," and cross his fingers that it never came out that he was the one who did, and that Tony T would simply take his word, approach me, and tell me, "Give me the phone or get ready to die." What Tony T didn't know is that during the time that he was kind of picking off all of these Crips one by one, my gang, the 7-4s, the G's, though small, had a big, important meeting. And we decided, we don't know why Tony's doing this to the Crips. We don't know if there's some previous context here that we're not aware of. That is, it would make sense of why this is happening between the Blood and the Crips, or if he's just doing this to anyone and everyone, and he simply hasn't made his way to us yet. But if he does ever try one of us, we need to remember and agree on the fact that we are representing an organization. We take pride in it, and we will not just give in and hand over what he demands. And if the cost of that is being stabbed or beaten attacked, whatever, then so be it. But we will have the respect as a gang for fighting as hard as we could. And this conversation is what would flash through my mind on the night that I got a heart-dropping, gut-wrenching phone call from none other than Tony T himself. That's right, a phone call from him on that side using a contraband cell phone. Somehow, unbeknownst to me, probably because Cruz had something to do with it, he had gotten my phone number of my contraband cell phone and called me. And when I picked up and heard his voice, I knew I was next. And he told me, I heard that you have the phone I'm looking for, so all I want to know is, are you going to give it up, or are you going to be ready to die? Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that I said bring it on and I wasn't worried about it. I'm not going to tell you that I wasn't scared. I'm not going to tell you that I didn't have knots in my stomach. I'm not going to tell you that I desperately wanted to frantically explain this is all some mistake. This is a big misunderstanding. I don't know where you heard that, but certainly not me. But in the back of my mind, I'm remembering that wouldn't look very strong of me, would it? That wouldn't be a very good representation of the gang that I just had this big important conversation with, would it? And so all I told him was, I don't have your phone. The only phone that I have is mine, and it's always been mine. That's all I have to say. And I knew he wasn't going to like that. And I promise you, I still can't believe I even said it to him, because I didn't want to even say those words, because I knew what would happen. And he said, okay, we'll be over there first thing in the morning. And he hung up. Now, wait a minute, Jumpsuit. Why not explain to him with a good bit more effort of why he's mistaken, how this is all a misunderstanding? How is that not very strong looking? Just tell him, well, you got to think. For all I know, I don't know him. I don't know what he's heard and what he hasn't heard. He might just be making that whole thing up just to prey upon me, just to throw an excuse out there for, any reason to come over here and just take my phone for no reason, just like he took all the other guys' phone. I don't know. And so if I was to sit there and just be scrambling for any type of understanding with this guy, it may come off to him as, hey, this guy's trying real hard to avoid a problem. He's fresh meat. He's ready for the kill. Let's go get his phone. It might encourage him even more. So I felt that I just need to stand my ground and act like, hey, do what you got to do. So that was my thinking behind it. And I would reconsider and doubt and question that thinking all night, because I surely didn't get much sleep until the morning. As promised, first thing in the morning, 8 a.m., when I heard the doors pop of my side of the cell block, and in walked Tony T, with not 3, 4, 5, but probably over 20 bloods behind him. These guys came onto the cell block. They went up both steps to the top tier, which is where I was and where my cell was. They went both ways, just kind of like surrounding, 10 and 10 each side, and they just came, and all of them just kind of crowded my cell. As they did, I stepped into my cell to face the music, because I was committed to the conversation I had with my gang, not even realize I'd been sold out by one of them. That's just one of the many treacheries that you'll see happen in that prison life. And I kind of step into my cell, and I have to give credit where it's due. The 2 other gang members of mine stepped into that cell with me to have my back, and I love them to death for that, and I respect them forever for that. But no matter, we were outmatched. All of these young guys were kept outside, just as always, except this time it wasn't 3 guys, it was about 15 guys who were outside of the cell to make sure no one else interfered with what happened inside my cell, where I was and my 2 other gang members who were by my side were. And there was about 5 of the heavy hitters. They were known just throughout their time and their reputation for doing some damage when they had to. And because Tony T came, and that just seemed to change everything. Now he had these guys who he was able to put against me, who I knew, and everyone knew, were just as dangerous probably as Tony T. And so I had Tony and these heavy hitters, about 5 or 6 of them in my cell, surrounding us, blocking the door. I couldn't escape if I wanted to. So they were surrounding us, and on all of their hips I saw knives, ice picks, flat blades we called them, a pole, an axe, one of the makeshift axes, which is pretty much a mop stick, a plastic one, snapped in half over your knee, and then you take a sharpened down kind of rectangular piece of metal, and you kind of jam it onto the end of that mop stick and tie it with ripped off braided bed sheets. So you had this axe, I mean, just any weapon you could think of. These guys were armed and equipped, and they were ready to use them. And I knew there's no, if this happens, if they decide to just pop it off, I'm screwed. I'm not making it out of this cell alive. And as I'm thinking about all of this, and just a lot of things you can imagine are flashing in my mind, just taking in the situation I found myself in, Tony T asked me one more time. He says, "Last chance, are you going to give me that cell phone?" And the cell phone is on me. And I'd already made my mind up, if they want this, they're going to have to do what they do to me and literally pull it out of my pockets once I'm laying on the floor bleeding. I reconsidered this thought during that moment, I won't lie, but something about the fact that these 2 guys, knowing that we weren't going to win this in any way, had still chosen to step into this cell with me to have my back. There's no way I could just do that. You know, at that time, because I knew that I wasn't wrong. I was right. This was mine. You know, I hadn't stolen from this man, and he thought I did. And at that time, before I could answer, he started arguing with this other member of my gang. They got into this argument about gang politics, you could say, you know, just how things work with gangs and what is called for and what is uncalled for as far as this type of thing happening between gangs, because there are understandings in place, not just at this yard. It spreads throughout the whole state and every prison yard. Because if we get in a fight, it's going to affect those 2 gangs in every cell block on every prison yard throughout the state once they hear that this happened between us. And they get in this argument, and while they're arguing, I realized that he genuinely, that all of this has started because he genuinely believes that I have a phone that belongs to him. And so I speak up, and to make a long story short, I give enough details and explain it. You guys, you've been here for 30 minutes, so you know I can do some good explaining and connect some dots and give enough detail to where he was actually able to realize that the phone I had was not the phone he was looking for. He actually decided to kind of stand down at that point, to my surprise and to my thankfulness. And then it came to question, well, I understand you don't have it, but then who does have it? Somebody does. And if you don't have it, why would Cruz tell me you had it? And I said, oh, Cruz told you that. That's funny, because Cruz just got himself a phone the other day. And, you know, all these dots get connected, and we realize that Cruz is the one who has the phone he's looking for. And not only that, he's the one who kind of put it all on me. And so all at once, everyone kind of files out of my cell, and the tension is released, at least in that moment. And I'm so thankful for that. It's the closest I've ever felt to death back there. I really felt in that moment I may not make it home to my family and my friends, and this may be it. It's a hell of a feeling. But it was over. Now, it was over for me, not for Cruz. And as for what happened to Cruz after that, of course, our gang had no sympathy for our fellow gang member after learning what he did. And as to what happened to him, As far as Tony T and his gang's concerned and what they decided to do about it, I think I'd rather just not go into detail about that, and maybe it wouldn't be smart. But you can imagine. Now, my final thoughts on this. Number one, thankfully I'm alive. Number two, much as I hate the atmosphere and the mood and the vibe and this, kind of rain cloud that Tony T brought with him to this yard that was fine before he arrived. As much as I hate all that, again, credit where credit's due and respect where it's earned. He could have physically outpowered, outnumbered, and outmatched me that day. And if he wanted to, right or wrong, justified or not, he could have taken that from me. He could have taken my cell phone. But he didn't. And when he learned that I truly had not taken the phone that he was looking for, he left me alone. And I kept my cell phone. And so for that, I respect him. And for my life and the health that I still have, I'm grateful. See you next time.